The most important watch ever made is almost certainly not the best watch you can buy. Importance and quality are two completely different things, and the moment that clicks, the whole history of the wristwatch falls into place. These are 7 watches that did not just sell well or photograph nicely, they rewrote the rules, and every brand that came afterward had to build inside the lines these 7 drew. We're going to walk through them roughly in order, from the watch that first strapped time to your wrist, all the way to the one that pulled an entire country's industry back from the dead. By the end, you will know exactly which 7 designs the rest of the market has been quietly copying for more than 100 years. And it starts above the rooftops of Paris in 1904. Number 1. The Cartier Santos from 1904. Walk into a jeweler today and the Santos sits in the dress watch case. Square, elegant, the kind of thing you wear with a suit. That image is almost the opposite of what it was built for. The Santos began life as a working cockpit instrument. Its owner was Alberto Santos Dumont, a Brazilian aviator and one of the most famous men in Europe, who flew early aircraft and balloons in front of enormous crowds. The problem was simple and dangerous. To check a pocket watch in flight, he had to take a hand off the controls and dig into his jacket. And at the helm of an early flying machine, that was not a small thing. So his friend Louis Cartier built him a watch he could read with a glance, strapped flat to the wrist. In 1904, that was a genuinely radical object, because the wristwatch barely existed and was seen as jewelry for women. The Santos was different. It was purpose-built, designed around a job, which makes it the first real pilot's watch and one of the first proper men's wristwatches. That flat, squared case and those exposed screws on the bezel became Cartier's signature, and they echoed through the brand's shaped watches for decades, the tank included. Almost every tough, purpose-built watch on this list traces back to that idea, a watch built around a task instead of around a jewelry box. The aviator got his watch. What nobody realized yet was that the next great leap would not be about reading time in the air. It would be about surviving underwater. Number 2. The Rolex Oyster from 1926. But the Oyster almost did not work. And the first attempt is the part Rolex leaves out of the adverts. Back in 1922, Hans Wilsdorf, the man behind Rolex, had a sealed watch he called the Submarine. It used an outer case screwed over the movement to keep water out. The flaw showed up the moment you wore it. To wind it or set the time, you had to unscrew that protective case, which opened the watch right back up to the water it was supposed to keep out. It defeated the entire point. The Oyster fixed the flaw properly. It sealed the case with a screw-down caseback and, crucially, a screw-down crown, so you could wind and set the watch without ever breaking the seal. Then around 1931, Rolex added the perpetual rotor, a self-winding mechanism, which meant you barely had to touch the crown at all. The real story here is not the engineering, it is what Rolex did with it. In 1927, a young typist named Mercedes Gleitz swam the English Channel with an oyster around her neck, and after more than 10 hours in cold, open water, the watch was still running. Rolex bought the entire front page of the Daily Mail to announce it. Think about that for a second. That makes Gleitz arguably the first paid brand ambassador in the history of the industry. Rolex did not just invent a waterproof case, they invented watch marketing. And the company that learned to sell a sealed watch was about to build the one design that every other brand on Earth would spend the next 70 years copying. Number 3. The Rolex Submariner from 1953. This is the single most influential watch design in history, and I want to be specific about how far that goes. The Submariner is so widely copied that you cannot escape it by simply avoiding the Submariner itself. Black dial, rotating bezel, glowing dots, steel case on a steel bracelet. To get away from that template entirely, you would have to leave mechanical watches altogether. It is the default setting for what a watch is supposed to look like. It earned that status partly on screen. In 1962, Sean Connery wore a Submariner reference 6538, the Big Crown, as James Bond in Dr. No. A dive tool became the watch of the most stylish man in cinema. Underneath the fame, it was the genuine article. Jacques Cousteau's divers wore them, and so did several militaries, Because the Submariner did what it claimed: waterproof to 100 meters with a bezel you could use to track your air. The funny part is that the watch built for the bottom of the ocean became the one men wear to the office, and plenty of people who own one have never been below the surface of a swimming pool. One honest note, because this channel does not deal in fairy tales. The Submariner was not the first modern dive watch. Blancpain's 50 Fathoms reached the market the same year, a few months earlier, and it arguably got some things right first, like the locking bezel. So why does everyone copy the Submariner and not the Blancpain? Because the Submariner was the tipping point. It crossed over from tool to icon, and once it did, the rest of the industry followed it into the water. But while Switzerland was busy perfecting the mechanical watch, a company on the other side of the world was building something that would nearly wipe all of it off the map. Number 4. The Seiko Astron from 1969. If the Submariner is the most influential design, the Astron is the most disruptive watch ever made. Full stop. On Christmas Day in 1969, in Tokyo, Seiko released the world's first quartz wristwatch. Instead of a balance wheel ticking back and forth, it used a tiny quartz crystal vibrating thousands of times a second, which made it around 100 times more accurate than the finest mechanical watch on the planet. This kicked off what the Swiss still call the quartz crisis. And here's the detail that stings. The Swiss were not blindsided by some technology they could not build. They were developing quartz in parallel and simply hesitated. Because mechanical watchmaking was their entire identity, and they did not want to believe it could be replaced. Seiko's leadership did the opposite. Watching the Swiss inch forward, the company president told his engineers to get a quartz watch to market inside a year. And they did. Japan committed. Switzerland flinched. The damage was brutal. Swiss watch employment fell from roughly 90,000 people around 1970 to about 30,000 by the mid-1980s. That is close to 2/3 of the workforce gone in little more than a decade. An entire national industry nearly erased by a crystal the size of a grain of rice. Seiko ran an advertising line promising that someday all watches would be made this way. That did not come fully true. Mechanical watches obviously survived, but the trajectory it set reshaped everything, and the watch world split into a clean before and after. So, if quartz was the disease, the cure would have to come from the very country quartz nearly destroyed. We will get there. But first, while Switzerland was on its knees, one Swiss brand made a defiant bet that did the exact opposite of going cheap. If you are getting something out of this, a subscribe genuinely helps the channel. That is the whole pitch. Now, let's continue. Number 5. The Audemars Piguet Royal Oak from 1972. This is the watch that invented the luxury steel sports watch, a category that did not exist before it. The story goes that Audemars Piguet needed something bold for the Basel Fair, called in the designer Gerald Genta, and Genta sketched the entire thing in a single evening. He took the shape from an old diver's helmet of all things and turned it into an octagonal bezel held down by 8 exposed screws with an integrated bracelet, all in stainless steel. The counterintuitive truth is that the icon was a slow burn. Audemars Piguet was a tiny house, making only a few thousand watches a year, and the first run of around 1,000 Royal Oaks took years to sell. People could not understand why a steel watch cost what it did. And the pricing is the genuinely wild part. The Royal Oak was priced higher than most gold watches of the day, and many times the price of a steel Rolex Submariner. A steel watch, more expensive than gold. Instead of hiding that, Audemars Piguet advertised it. One campaign called it the costliest stainless steel watch in the world. Another asked whether you would buy a Rembrandt for its canvas. They sold the price as the point. It worked, eventually. Every steel sports watch you covet today, the Nautilus, the whole genre, traces back to Genta's overnight sketch. He proved that the material does not set the value, the story does. That same year, on the other side of the planet, an engineer was about to prove something almost opposite, that the toughest watch in the world did not need to be precious at all. Number 6. The Casio G-Shock from 1983. It started when an engineer named Kikuo Ibe dropped a watch his father had given him and watched it shatter on the floor. That broke something in him, too. And in 1981, he pitched a single idea at Casio, a watch that would not break even if you dropped it. The internal team he led had a name that tells you everything. Project Team Tough. What followed sounds like a cartoon, except it actually happened. Ibe and his team built more than 200 prototypes, and to test them, they hurled them out of a third-story bathroom window onto the concrete below, then picked through the wreckage to see what had failed. Over and over. Nothing survived intact, and he nearly quit. Then he was sitting in a park and watched a child bouncing a rubber ball, and the answer landed. The delicate parts did not need a stronger shell around them. They needed to float, suspended inside the case so the shock never reached them, the way the rubber skin protects the air inside a bouncing ball. That floating module became the DW5000C, the first G-Shock, in 1983. It built a whole category out of nothing. Toughness, as a thing you actually buy a watch for, basically did not exist before this. And here's the twist nobody at Casio planned. The G-Shock flopped at first, picked up only by construction workers and police. Then it landed on the wrist of the hero on MacGyver. The skate scene adopted it, and a rugged tool became a street-style icon. It came not from a Swiss workshop, but from a Japanese calculator company, born out of one man's refusal to accept that a watch had to be fragile. Which brings us to the final watch on the list, and the one that pulled off the most unlikely rescue in the whole story. Number 7. The Swatch from 1983. Remember the quartz crisis? The one that nearly killed Swiss watchmaking? The Swatch is how Switzerland punched back. The name is short for second watch, the idea being a watch casual enough to own a pile of, and the man who drove the rescue was a consultant named Nicholas Hayek. The genius of what he built lives in two moves that usually get glossed over. The first move was the watch itself. Cheap, colorful, Swiss-made plastic quartz, sold for pocket money. People did not buy one Swatch. They bought several, treated them as collectible fashion, and a real share of those buyers caught the watch bug and graduated years later to serious mechanical pieces. The Swatch was a gateway into the entire hobby. The second move was strategic, and it is the clever part. By beating Asia at the cheap quartz game, on price, on Asia's own terms, Switzerland neutralized the threat that had nearly destroyed it. With the low end defended and the cash flowing, Swiss makers finally had the room to do the thing that actually saved them long term. They re-legitimized the mechanical watch, not as an obsolete way to tell time, but as craft, as heritage, as the premium choice. The thing quartz had made unnecessary became the thing you bought precisely because it was unnecessary. And if you think that formula stopped working, look at 2022, when Swatch and Omega released the Moon Swatch, a cheap plastic watch that sent people queuing around the block and flipping it for multiples. 40 years later, the exact same playbook still works. So we end where we started. The most important watches are almost never the best ones. These 7 did not win on quality. They won by changing what every watch after them was allowed to be. And you can see traces of all 7 in whatever is sitting on your wrist right now.